You know that kind of day when everything is okay, truly okay. No crisis, no urgent deadline, no unresolved conflict waiting for you. A day when work has been manageable, your health is good, your relationships feel steady. A day when, by every measure, you could simply rest. And then, sometime in the middle of the afternoon, or in the quiet of the evening, that thought appears. Quiet, but unmistakable. This won't last. Not as a rational conclusion, as certainty, as though the good day isn't evidence that things are okay, but proof that something you can't yet see is about to happen. This isn't pessimism, it isn't anxiety without a reason. It's a nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do, and what it learned at some point in life was not to trust silence. To understand why the brain treats good days with suspicion, we need to understand something neuroscientist Karl Friston from University College London has spent decades developing. Friston proposed that the brain doesn't work like a camera. It doesn't first record the world as it is, and then process what it finds. It works the other way around. At every moment, the brain generates a prediction about what it's going to encounter, an expectation of how the environment will behave, of what the people around you will do, of what the next hour is likely to bring. Those predictions are built from accumulated experience, from the system's history with that kind of situation, that kind of environment, that kind of day. And when the world matches the prediction, not much happens. The system quietly updates, as expected, and moves on. But when the world doesn't match the prediction, when something is different from what was expected, the system generates a signal, a prediction error, an alert that says, there's a mismatch between what I expected and what's actually happening. Now apply that mechanism to a system that, over months or years, learned to expect difficulty. A system whose baseline prediction includes a certain amount of tension, problems, or something that always needs to be monitored. For that system, a day when nothing bad is happening isn't simply registered as a good day. It's registered as a mismatch between what was expected and what is actually occurring. And mismatches, regardless of whether they're positive or negative, generate a signal. In practical terms, a brain that has learned to expect difficulty processes the absence of difficulty as unexpected information. And unexpected information, by definition, deserves attention. It deserves monitoring. It deserves the question, why is this different from usual? For that system, a good day doesn't become confirmation that everything is okay. It becomes an anomaly that still hasn't been explained. There's another layer to this pattern that psychologist Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania documented over decades of research into how people explain life's events to themselves. Seligman found that every person develops a relatively consistent explanatory style, a habitual way of making sense of good and bad experiences. For negative events, the explanatory style most commonly seen in people who are prone to anxiety or depression is permanent, internal, and global. This always happens. It's because of who I am. This affects everything. But what is rarely discussed is how the same people explain positive events. With good events, the pattern reverses. Temporary, external, specific. This won't last. I just got lucky. It's only this one thing. It doesn't mean life has actually changed. These aren't deliberate thoughts. They're automatic interpretations, so fast and so automatic that they arrive as perceptions rather than conclusions. When a good day appears, this system doesn't consciously evaluate whether everything is okay. Before any conscious thought forms, the experience passes through that automatic filter, temporary, external, specific. And the result is that the good day never accumulates as evidence that life can actually be good. Instead, it's processed as an exception that confirms the general rule. The rule that says difficulty is the real state of life, and well-being is only a temporary deviation. Think about how this shows up in everyday life. A peaceful week at work. Instead of relaxing into it, the system begins taking inventory of what might be wrong somewhere else, as if calm at work has to be balanced by worry in another area of life, a period of good health. And suddenly, The mind starts monitoring symptoms that weren't even on its radar before, as though the absence of a known problem has to be filled by searching for one that hasn't been discovered yet, a relationship that's going well. And without any obvious reason, subtle irritability appears. A little emotional distance, a reluctance to let yourself fully trust the stability that's there, as if completely believing the relationship is safe feels like a risk the system isn't willing to take. In every one of these situations, the pattern isn't conscious self-sabotage. It's the system remaining loyal to what it learned, that good days are temporary, that anomalies must be monitored, that fully trusting silence is exactly when the unexpected arrives. But there's something even more specific happening here, because prediction error and explanatory style explain how the system processes a good day at the cognitive level. What they still don't explain is why, for many nervous systems, the good day itself becomes a trigger for alarm, as though everything is okay is the very signal that something is about to stop being okay. And the answer begins in a mechanism far older than conscious thought, a kind of learning the nervous system performs without any deliberate instruction. And once that learning has taken place, it's remarkably difficult to undo through willpower alone. The brain is an archive of associations, not of rules, not of principles, of associations. When two things happen repeatedly close together in time, the system learns to anticipate one when it encounters the other. This is the foundation of classical conditioning, the kind of learning Ivan Pavlov documented in his famous experiments, and that, after more than a century of research, remains one of the most fundamental and enduring learning mechanisms the nervous system possesses. What is rarely discussed about this mechanism is that it works equally well in every direction, including the direction of linking something good to something bad that comes afterward. Think of a child who grew up in an emotionally unpredictable environment, not necessarily one in constant crisis, but one marked by consistent unpredictability. Things could stay calm for days, and then, without any clear warning, the atmosphere would suddenly become tense. Dinner could be peaceful, and something would fall apart at bedtime. A Sunday afternoon could be wonderful, and then Monday would arrive carrying the tension that changed everything. Repeated often enough, the system learns the association, not as an intellectual conclusion, as an automatic prediction. When things are calm, get ready. When things are good, stay alert. When everything feels safe, that may be the most dangerous moment. Within that logic, a good day is not experienced as a state. It is experienced as a precursor, a conditioned stimulus that the system has learned, through repeated experience, to associate with the negative event that tended to follow. Researcher Heim and psychiatrist Charles Nemeroff, working at Emory University, spent decades conducting one of the most comprehensive research programs on how early adverse experiences affect the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system responsible for regulating the body's hormonal response to stress. What they documented has implications that extend far beyond the period when those experiences occurred. Repeated exposure to unpredictable stress during critical stages of development sensitizes the HPA axis. It doesn't simply make the system more reactive to future stressors. It changes the threshold at which the system decides that a situation deserves a stress response. And one of the most consistent consequences of that sensitization is that it generalizes. A system that has been sensitized by unpredictability doesn't become reactive only to clearly dangerous situations. It also becomes reactive to contexts that are structurally similar to those that once preceded stress, even when those contexts are objectively safe. For a system shaped by environments where good moments were often followed by disruption, the very context that activates the HPA axis can literally be a good day. Not because the day itself is dangerous, but because it resembles, in its structure, what the system learned to associate with what came next. This explains something many people describe with remarkable accuracy but rarely understand: the feeling of becoming more anxious during periods of relative calm than during times of genuine pressure. The paradox of finding solid ground harder to live on than unstable ground. The strange experience of finally reaching the life you wanted and discovering that it doesn't bring the relief you were certain it would. But there is another mechanism that deepens this pattern, and it may be the most important one of all because it operates actively during good days, not merely as a predisposition. Researcher Stefan Hofmann at Boston University spent years studying the specific behaviors people develop to manage anxiety in difficult situations. He called them safety behaviors. The initial logic behind safety behaviors is simple and understandable. If there's something I'm worried about, a presentation, a conversation, an uncertain situation, I do something that reduces the chances of what I fear actually happening. I prepare more than necessary. I avoid anything that could trigger the problem. I monitor for signs that something might be going wrong. I never allow myself to fully settle into the moment because one part of me feels it has to stay on guard. In the short term, these behaviors reduce anxiety, and that's exactly why they persist. But they create a long-term effect that Hoffman documented consistently. They prevent disconfirmation. Think about how this works on a good day. Based on its history of associations, the system predicts that something bad will eventually happen. To protect itself, it engages in safety behaviors. It keeps monitoring. It avoids fully committing to the positive experience. It mentally prepares for the problem that hasn't arrived yet. It doesn't celebrate. It never fully settles. It never completely lets its guard down. The day ends. Nothing bad happened. But the conclusion the system reaches is not, everything was fine. I can trust good days. Instead, it concludes, good thing I stayed on guard. It worked. The safety behavior gets the credit for the absence of danger, and the belief that good days require vigilance remains completely intact, because it was never tested. There was never an experience of letting the guard down on a good day, and discovering that the day stayed good anyway. Every good day spent in vigilance is a good day that never updates the system. It becomes another day that passes without leaving behind any evidence that trust was actually safe. If this describes something you've experienced, that very specific inability to simply be present on a good day without simultaneously waiting for what might come next, this channel exists to put a name to exactly that experience. Every video here adds another piece to the map of how the system really works. Subscribe so the next one is already waiting for you. But there's one final layer to this story. So far, we've seen how the system learns to distrust good days, how sensitization turns positive experiences into triggers for vigilance, how safety behaviors prevent any good day from becoming evidence that trust is actually safe. What we still haven't explored is the specific mechanism that explains why, even when someone consciously decides, I'm going to enjoy today, their attention keeps getting pulled toward potential problems, as if there was something inside the system that simply cannot stop scanning for threats, even when no objective threat is present. And the explanation lies not in what the system wants to do, but in a specific function that anxiety disrupts before any conscious decision is ever made. Michael Eysenck, a psychologist at Royal Holloway, University of London, spent decades investigating what anxiety does specifically to attention. Not to mood, not to memory, not to reasoning in general, but to attention. To our ability to deliberately direct our focus where we want it, and to pull it away from where we don't. What he documented in what became known as attentional control theory is that anxiety disrupts two specific executive functions of the attentional system. The first is inhibition, the ability to block out irrelevant information, especially information with threatening content, so it doesn't dominate our attention when it shouldn't. The second is shifting, the ability to voluntarily move attention from one thing to another, to decide where to focus and actually be able to focus there. When anxiety is elevated, both of these functions become impaired. Inhibition weakens, allowing threat-related information to pass through the filter more easily with less resistance from the system. Shifting weakens as well. Once attention locks onto a potential threat, a thought about what could go wrong, an ambiguous signal in the environment, it doesn't disengage as easily as it would in a system with healthy attentional control. Now apply that to the experience of a good day. You're having a genuinely peaceful afternoon. You consciously decide to enjoy it. You tell yourself you're not going to think about problems that don't exist. Then, at some point, your attention gets pulled toward a thought about something that could go wrong. Instead of naturally moving on, as it would in a system with fully functioning attentional control, your attention stays there. It stays with the thought about the possible problem. It stays evaluating a risk that doesn't even exist yet. It stays scanning the horizon for whatever this peaceful afternoon might still be hiding. And your conscious attempt to redirect your attention, stop thinking about it, everything's fine, runs into an attentional shifting system that, precisely because it's operating under background anxiety, has less capacity to carry out that shift. That's why deciding, I'm going to enjoy today, is rarely enough on its own. Not because the decision isn't genuine, but because the very executive function responsible for carrying out that decision is operating with reduced capacity in the exact state where it's needed the most. Your attention doesn't stay on the threat because you're choosing to focus on it. It stays there because the system that would allow you to move away from it is compromised. There's another perspective that helps explain why good days can trigger stress activation even when there's nothing objectively stressful happening. Sonia Lupien, a researcher at the University of Montreal, conducted extensive research into what actually makes something stressful for the nervous system. What she found is that stress isn't activated by the negative content of an event. It's activated by structural characteristics of the event, regardless of whether that event is objectively good or bad. Lupien identified 4 characteristics that reliably activate the stress system. She called them nuts. Novelty. The situation is new, with no clear precedent in the system's experience. Unpredictability. What happens next isn't clear. Low perceived control. The system doesn't know how to influence the outcome. Threat to the ego. The situation has implications for how we see ourselves or how others see us. Now apply that framework to a good day in a system that's been calibrated for difficulty. Novelty? Yes. A day without tension is less familiar to the system than a day filled with tension. Unpredictability? Yes. For a system that has no established pattern of good days simply continuing, what comes after a good day remains uncertain. Low perceived control? Yes. The system doesn't fully understand why today feels okay, and therefore doesn't know how to make sure it stays that way. Threat to the ego? Sometimes yes. Especially when the good day involves not producing, not fixing anything, not winning in any measurable sense. For a sensitized nervous system, a good day can meet 3 or even all 4 of the conditions that activate the stress response, not because the day is objectively difficult, but because it's structurally unfamiliar. This explains a pattern many people describe as one of the most frustrating forms of anxiety, the kind that appears precisely when there's no visible reason for it. The kind that shows up more often on weekends than on weekdays. The kind that intensifies during vacations, celebrations, or birthdays. Not because those moments are difficult, but because they're new, unpredictable in their details, and outside the pattern the nervous system recognizes as familiar territory. And the cost of all this goes beyond simply losing the moment. A good day lived under suspicion doesn't become evidence that good days are possible, because the attention that was supposed to be experiencing that day was, most of the time, busy scanning for what might be wrong. So the system records, "I survived the good day." It does not record, "A good day is actually safe to live in." And good days that never become encoded as safe don't update the prediction. The next good day arrives, and the system meets it with exactly the same level of distrust as the one before, because the evidence that could have changed that prediction, the experience of living through a good day without constant vigilance, was never fully processed. But here's what changes the way we understand this entire pattern. It isn't permanent. It isn't who you are. It's the result of a system making predictions based on the only database it has. And databases can be updated when they're given enough evidence of the right kind. What the right kind of evidence actually means, and why simply deciding to trust isn't enough to create it, is what brings everything we've explored in this video together in its conclusion. The system that struggles to trust good days won't learn to trust them through a decision. That's the piece that changes everything. Because the most natural and most understandable response to this pattern is to try to solve it with logic. I know everything is fine, so I'll just act like it is. There's no real reason to feel this suspicious, so I'll ignore it. I'll let myself enjoy this because there's no evidence that anything bad is about to happen. But the system generating that distrust isn't the system that responds to arguments. It's the prediction system. And as Karl Friston's work suggests, prediction systems update through accumulated prediction errors, not through intellectual conviction. In practical terms, this is simple to describe and genuinely difficult to live. The system learns to trust good days when it repeatedly predicts something bad will follow this, and that prediction repeatedly fails to come true. A good day arrives, the alarm rises, the day ends without the expected negative event, then it happens again and again. Slowly, the system begins updating its prediction. Maybe good days aren't always followed by something bad. But this updating process has one direct enemy: safety behaviors. If every good day is spent monitoring, preparing for problems, and maintaining background vigilance, then when the day ends peacefully, the credit goes to the vigilance. Good thing I stayed on guard. And the prediction is never disconfirmed. It's reinforced. The vigilance worked. I need to keep doing it. True disconfirmation, the kind that actually updates prediction, requires something that goes directly against the system's instincts. It requires allowing a good day to simply be a good day, without the extra layer of protection, without parallel monitoring, without reserving part of your attention for scanning for danger. Not all at once, not perfectly at first, but in gradually increasing amounts. Every good day that is genuinely lived, with just a little less vigilance, and still ends, well, adds another thin layer of evidence to the new prediction the system is slowly learning to make. This doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen in a straight line. Some good days will end with something difficult. The system will use those moments as proof that its distrust was justified. But with enough evidence accumulated over time, the prediction becomes more nuanced. Sometimes good days end well, sometimes they don't, and that uncertainty doesn't require constant vigilance. Here's the central idea behind everything we've explored in this video. The system that doesn't trust good days isn't wrong. It's outdated. It's operating from a database built in an environment that no longer exists, and generating predictions that were accurate in that environment but survived long after they stopped being necessary. Updating that database isn't a matter of willpower, it's a matter of time, repetition, and allowing experience, not belief, to become the evidence the system receives. If any part of this video describes something you've experienced, that specific distrust of peaceful days, the feeling that good moments are always temporary, leave a comment. Just one word, whatever stayed with you. Because naming this pattern is the first moment your system begins to discover that another response is possible. Subscribe if you'd like to continue this journey with the next videos. Predictive processing, developed by neuroscientist Karl Friston at University College London, proposes that the brain operates by continuously generating predictions about what it expects to encounter and processing the world through the gap between those predictions and reality. For a system that has learned to expect difficulty, a good day is registered as a mismatch between prediction and reality, not as relief, but as a signal that something unexpected is happening and therefore deserves monitoring. Explanatory style, a concept developed by Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, describes the automatic patterns people use to interpret positive and negative events. In systems prone to anxiety, positive events are interpreted as temporary, it won't last; external, it was just luck; and specific, it's only this one thing, preventing them from accumulating as evidence that well-being is both possible and sustainable. Classical conditioning applied to positive-negative sequences shows that when periods of well-being are repeatedly followed by disruption or hardship, especially during critical stages of development, the nervous system learns to associate positive states with the negative events that historically followed them. As a result, feeling good is no longer experienced as a stable state, but as a conditioned signal that something bad may be next. Research by Heim and Charles Nemeroff at Emory University on early life sensitization of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis demonstrates that unpredictable stress during critical developmental periods raises the stress system's reactivity threshold, and that this sensitization generalizes to situations that structurally resemble the circumstances preceding the original stress, including contexts that are objectively safe or even positive. Safety behaviors, studied extensively by Stefan Hofmann at Boston University, reduce anxiety in the short term but prevent the disconfirmation of the beliefs that sustain that anxiety. On good days, behaviors such as constant monitoring, mentally preparing for problems that haven't appeared, and withholding full engagement from positive experiences prevent the system from learning that good moments can be lived safely without vigilance, thereby preserving the prediction that vigilance is necessary. Attentional control theory, developed by Michael Eysenck at Royal Holloway, University of London, demonstrates that anxiety specifically disrupts the executive functions responsible for inhibition and attentional shifting, making it more difficult to block threat-related information and deliberately redirect attention. On good days, this explains why the conscious decision to just enjoy it is rarely enough. The very system needed to carry out that decision is the one being impaired by background anxiety. The NUTS model, developed by Sonia Lupien at the University of Montreal, identifies 4 characteristics that reliably activate the stress response: novelty, unpredictability, low perceived control, and threat to the ego. For a system calibrated for chronic difficulty, a peaceful day may simultaneously meet 3 or even 4 of these conditions, not because it is objectively dangerous, but because it is structurally unfamiliar, prompting the alarm system to mobilize. Accumulated disconfirmation, supported by predictive processing neuroscience, shows that the only evidence capable of updating the prediction that good days are dangerous is the repeated experience of living through good days without constant vigilance, and discovering that the feared consequences never arrived. Not the belief that everything is okay. The lived experience that nothing bad happened when the system finally stopped watching for it. Distrusting good days takes many forms, but there's one form that appears with remarkable consistency, and it has a very distinct emotional flavor. It's not the feeling that something is wrong out there. It's the feeling that something is wrong in here, simply because you're not doing anything. For many nervous systems, the good day that creates the greatest discomfort isn't the day when something wonderful happens. It's the quiet day, the day without productivity, the day when the only visible problem is that there isn't a problem to solve. On those days, the distrust doesn't sound like, "What if something goes wrong?" It sounds like something much more specific: guilt. The guilt of not being productive, of resting when you could be getting ahead, of feeling okay without earning that sense of well-being through more effort. This pattern, the guilt of not doing, isn't just an extension of distrusting good days. It's its own mechanism, with its own history, its own neurobiology, and its own internal logic. Why does resting feel like failure for so many nervous systems? And what exactly feels threatened when the schedule is finally empty? That's what we'll explore in the next video.